This is Nature for the Well-Educated Heart. If you've come to this presentation looking for a systematic way to teach all the facts of nature to your children, you're probably going to be disappointed. There are many great curriculums out there to help you do that. I have much loftier intentions. Let me set the stage with this little journal entry of Louisa May Alcott, who of course wrote Little Women. The Alcott children were encouraged to keep diaries where they wrote down their thoughts, feelings, and desires, and even at an early age, Louisa's journal was a record of deep feelings. Here's the entry. I had an early run in the woods before the dew was off the grass. The moss was like velvet, and as I ran under the arch of yellow and red leaves, I sang for joy. My heart was so bright and the world so beautiful. I stopped at the end of the walk and saw the sunshine out over the wide Virginia meadows. It seemed like going through a dark life or grave into heaven beyond. A very strange and solemn feeling came over me as I stood there, with no sound but the rustle of the pines, no one near me, and the sun so glorious. As for me alone, it seemed as if I felt God as I never did before, and I prayed in my heart that I might keep that happy sense of nearness all my life. To that entry there is a note added years later. I have, for I most sincerely think that little girl got religion that day in the wood, when dear Mother Nature led her to God. Charles Darwin had a similar experience as a young man. He recalled standing in the middle of a Brazilian forest and looking up at the majesty of the trees and feeling there must be a higher power. In his later years, he regretted that he hadn't taken time from his scientific studies to read a little poetry and listen to some music every week, because his heart had hardened and he no longer was capable of feeling such things. It happened gradually, he said, so he had felt no alarm. That which we don't use atrophies from disuse. The truth is, we feel God, and the hard heart cannot feel him. We're living in an increasingly godless world, and I trace the root cause to hard-heartedness. The heart develops before the mind, and childhood is the time when the heart is most open to feelings and impressions. In our rush for academic excellence, which depends upon that which we can test and measure and is centered on the mind, we are starving the hearts of our children and thereby hardening them. The approach to nature study that I'll present today is centered on warming hearts, and the way we warm hearts is through the arts: story, music, poetry, and pictures. I know many of you are anxious to instill faith in your children, and while turning to scripture study is vital, sometimes we forget that God has revealed his heart and his intentions in many places. He is found in the inspired works of art and music, in inspired literature. He is found in the pages of history, and one of the best places to learn about the Creator is through his creations. Nature is God's university. 100 years ago, educators understood the connection between spiritual matters and a study of nature. This spiritual element is missing in most of today's nature study for children, which tend to focus only on the facts and information. To me, the facts are the shallow part. If they remain unconnected to the heart, they'll fade away with time. A deeper layer of nature study is the science part, where the laws and principles by which all of nature operates are revealed. But the deepest lessons can only be understood by the heart, which often cannot be expressed in words, but are as real or even more real than the facts gleaned by sight, sound, and touch. I believe we've got learning turned upside down. We usually start with facts and information, but they are dull and barren by themselves. They can sometimes be so cold and hard, a child develops a complete distaste for the subject. And then we turn to what we call a study of science. But most science curriculums I see are nothing more than a systematic unfolding of the facts, with some contrived experiments. Have we forgotten that a sense of wonder and questioning is at the heart of all true scientists? that a true scientist has learned to rely upon his own ability to closely observe and draw conclusions and form questions and theories from those observations? I see little of that in most science textbooks. I am in awe at the things man has figured out throughout history without the aid of computers or special equipment. They relied upon their power of observation and reasoning. I read an article recently that talked about how there have been relatively few scientific discoveries in the last 100 years. Technology has flourished, but not scientific discovery. Blame was placed on the lack of curiosity and the diminished power of observation, which I believe is the result of not tending to the heart first. Curiosity or desire and the powers of observation are the two gifts a mother can give her children in nature study. What you make a child love and desire is more important than what you make him learn. All the ideas I will present today for a study of nature are for tending to desire, which is a function of the heart, and for giving children eyes to see. Then you can add in the next layer, the science layer, which reveals the laws upon which everything operates. Heart first, then mind. I've spent the last 10 years immersed in the writings of great men and women I call the heart educators of 100 years ago, who understood the art of educating hearts of children first. I want to help you feel the difference, so I'm going to share samples from their writings. Let me start off with an excerpt from a letter Charles Kingsley wrote to children in the beginning of his Boys and Girls Book of Science, written in 1881. Dear boys and girls, so it is. One man walks through the world with his eyes open, another with his eyes shut, and upon this difference depends all the superiority of knowledge which one man acquires over another. Settle in your own minds whether they will be eyes or no eyes, whether they will, as they grow up, look and see for themselves what happens, or whether they will let other people look for them, or pretend to look, and dupe them and lead them about, the blind leading the blind till both fall into the ditch. God has given you eyes, and it is your duty to use them. If your parents tried to teach you your lessons in the most agreeable way, by beautiful picture books, would it not be ungracious, ungrateful, and altogether wrong to shut your eyes to those pictures and refuse to learn? And is it not altogether wrong to refuse to learn from your Father in heaven, the great God who made all things, when He offers to teach you all day long by the most beautiful and most wonderful of all picture books, which is simply all the things which you can see and hear and touch, from the suns and stars above our heads to the mosses and insects at your feet? It is your duty to learn His lessons, and it is your interest likewise. God's book, which is the universe, and the reading of God's book, which is science, can do you nothing but good and teach you nothing but truth and wisdom. So use your eyes and your intellect, your senses and your brains, and learn what God is trying to teach you continually by them. I do not mean that you must stop there and learn nothing more, anything but that. There are things which neither your senses nor your brains can tell you, and they are not only more glorious, but actually more true and more real than many things which you can't see or touch. But you must begin at the beginning in order to end at the end, and sow the seed if you wish to gather the fruit. God has ordained that you and every child which comes into the world should begin by learning something of the world about him by his senses and his brain. And the better you learn what they can teach you, the more fit will you be to learn what they cannot teach you. The more you try now to understand things, the more you will be able hereafter to understand men and that which is above men. You begin to find out that truly divine mystery by watching the common natural things around you and considering the lilies of the field, how they grow, that you will begin at last to learn that far diviner mystery, that you have a Father in heaven. And so you will be delivered, if you will, out of the tyranny of darkness and distrust and fear into God's free kingdom of light and faith and love. That thirst to know why was put into the hearts of little children by God Himself, and I believe that God would never have given them that thirst if He had not meant to satisfy it. Isn't that a beautiful introduction to nature study? A masterpiece can only be painted one brush stroke at a time, and while we want our children to take in nature as a whole, it is best revealed a little here and a little there. If you go to welleducatedheart.com and select Nature in the online library, you'll see that I've created a 12-month rotation schedule for the study of nature designed primarily for children 12 and under. But I promise there's a lot to captivate the interest of your older children as well. The first 8 months have topics, and the last 4 months, fall and spring and summer, when hopefully you'll be able to take your children to mountains and oceans and deserts to begin to apply the lessons they've learned in the previous 8 months. The topics generally follow the order of creation in the Bible. I say generally because you'll notice it falls apart in the very first month. The first order of business was, let there be light. But the sun and moon and stars weren't created until the fourth day in the creation story, when it was time for seasons to start growing things. But there's a lesson. All creation begins with a spiritual light, a spark of life that the eye cannot see. Still, I think month 1 is the perfect time to start instilling a sense of wonder at the expanse of the universe and our place in it. Then comes the ocean and a study of water. When you look at a map of the world and see the rivers and streams, it's almost like looking at the circulation system. Water delivers life, and it makes me think of the living waters of Jesus Christ. Where there is no water, there is barren desert where nothing grows. Water is also the force that is wearing down the hard rocks to create the soil in which plants and living things can begin to flourish and grow. Then came other life forms that I unfold from the smallest to the largest, the insect, the bird, and the animal. As the creation is unfolded like that, you get the sense of the preparation, how one thing needed to be prepared in order for the next stage. And the purpose of all creation is to provide a home for God's crowning creation, His children. These topics are not meant to be rigid. It's perfectly acceptable to study a beautiful bird in your yard in month 1, even though birds don't come until month 7. The only reason for these topics is to help bring a little order to your teaching, so that you will eventually introduce all the topics. It gives you a focus each month to build around. Because you'll come back around the next year and the next year, you can adapt the study to the ages and developmental and interest level of your children. You don't have to cover everything in one sitting. I'm going to take you through a little sampler tour of these 8 months to show you the kinds of resources you have to draw from and to begin to plant ideas of how you might use them. We're warming hearts, so you'll find a lot of story, poetry, music, and art. At the end of the presentation, I'll tell you how you can get a copy of all the links to the books I'll be sharing with you. For our first stop, listen to Arabella Buckley's introduction in the Fairyland of Science, written in 1879, that may be something you'll want to share with your children. There are forces around us and among us which I shall ask you to allow me to call fairies, and these are 10,000 times more wonderful, more magical, and more beautiful in their work than those of the old fairy tales. They too are invisible, and many people live and die without ever seeing them or caring to see them. These people go about with their eyes shut, either because they will not open them or because no one has taught them how to see. There is only one gift we must have before we can learn to know them. We must have imagination, the power of making pictures or images in our mind of that which is, though it's invisible to us. Most children have this glorious gift, which enables us to the temporal things which are seen to realize those eternal truths which are unseen. You must wish to see them. If you ask yourself why things happened and how the great God above us has made and governs this world of ours? If you listen to the wind and care to learn why it blows, if you ask the little flower why it opens in the sunshine and closes in the storm, and if when you find questions you cannot answer, you will take the trouble to hunt out in books or make experiments or solve your own questions, then you will learn to know and love those fairies. We learn to see that there is a law and purpose in everything in the universe, and it makes us patient when we recognize the quiet, noiseless working of nature all around us, when we realize that all is worked with fixed laws, and that out of it, even if sometimes in suffering and pain, springs the wonderful universe around us. And then you say, can you fear for your own little life, even though it may have its troubles? Can you help feeling a part of this guided and governed nature? Or doubt that the power which fixed the laws of the stars and of the tiniest drop of water, that made the plant draw power from the sun, the tiny coral animal its food from the dashing waves, that adapted the flower to the insect and the insect to the flower, is also molding your life as part of the great machinery of the universe, so that you have only to work and to wait and to love? We are all groping dimly for the unseen power, but no one who loves nature and studies it can ever feel alone or unloved in the world. Facts, as mere facts, are dry and barren, but nature is full of life and love, and her calm, unswerving rule is tending to some great though hidden purpose. Even the little child who lives with nature and gazes on her with open eye must rise in some sense or other through nature to nature's God. So let's start with month 1, the stars. Remember, your job is not to supply all the facts of nature and the answers to every question you can anticipate. Rather, your job is to awaken desire, primarily by using stories that will begin to plant ideas in your children's hearts of things they'll look for when they get out in nature. We want them to fall in love with her. Isn't it awesome that the most glorious university in the world is free? You don't have to do nature study every day. Although it's good for children to be outside as much as they possibly can, most of what your children will learn about nature will be by exploration and discovery and finding answers to their own questions. You're just priming the pump by planting ideas. If you go into month 1, the first page has links to old pre-1923 books that can be read online for free. The second page has ideas for recent books that tie into the topic. Then there are suggestions for classical music and even craft ideas. It's not that the craft ideas in themselves are necessarily instructive. It's that they can occupy little hands so that their little ears can be open while you read nature stories to them or play classical music. At least that's one use. Mostly it's to engage in a pleasurable activity in association with the topic. One of the important activities of childhood is naming things, naming stars and flowers and animals. I can recreate the home of my early childhood by the names of flowers: the hibiscus by my bedroom window, the gardenia out the back door, the hydrangea, bougainvillea, camellia, pyracantha berries, hollyhocks, the magnolia tree in the front yard. There were no formal lessons, but I knew them all by name, and I knew my mother's favorite were the gardenias and the magnolia tree. Begin to name the stars and constellations and tell the stories the Greeks told of the stars, not all at once, of course, a little here and a little there. Wrap up in blankets and go lay out in the grass after bedtime and gaze up at the stars together. Sometimes silence is the best teacher. Recite poems. Did you know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star has a lot of verses? Play Mozart's variations of Twinkle, or Holst's Planets, or Wordsworth's Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar, not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. Share stories of scientists who love the stars, Galileo, Maria Mitchell, or the story of Van Gogh's Starry Night. Study the space program. Watch October Sky. Read science fiction where imaginations paint pictures of what may be out there. So many possibilities for the heart. Here's a little book I found that I love. Among the Stars, or Wonderful Things in the Sky by Agnes Giberne, written in 1885. Let me share the beginning. Dormer, I can't think where my star is gone. My own beautiful star. Oh, Dormer, it was always there before I was ill every evening for a whole week, and I meant to go on watching it always. Every evening it was there over the poplars, and you wouldn't let me go to look until the day, and now it is quite gone. Dormer replied, I wouldn't mind if I was you. There's hundreds of other stars just as good. One doesn't signify more or less. Wouldn't anybody care if a star was lost? Asked Icon wistfully. I shouldn't, Dormer replied. I think I should. I did love that star so, murmured the child. I used to think. Icon stopped short. Dormer was a most excellent and affectionate nurse, and he loved her dearly. She had cared for him with motherly tenderness from his earliest babyhood. Still, there was a certain something wanting between them. Icon never found that his little innermost thoughts and feelings and fancies met with a response from Dormer. He was a delicate and dreamy child, and he often longed for somebody to whom he could speak freely, somebody by whom he could be understood. Icon was always wondering about this and that, wishing to ask questions of somebody. He was tired of asking his teacher. She never would allow any break in her regular plan of teaching, and at the beginning and end of the time she was always in a hurry. It was a lonely life that he led. He had no little sisters and no little friends. His chief pleasures were found in the companionship of his pet dog, and of the birds and plants and trees in the garden. But Icon had one pleasure greater than even these, and that was in the companionship of the stars. This seems an odd word to use about the stars and a little boy, yet in a sense it is the right word, for Icon loved the stars. He could not have told the time when first he began to love the stars. The feeling seemed to have grown upon him slowly as he grew up out of babyhood. Even as a tiny child he had delighted to gaze on the glittering sky, and had often clapped his little hands with joy at the sight. He could not have told why he loved that star so much. It was only about a week or 10 days before his illness that he had first noticed it, shining over the distant line of poplar trees, low down near the horizon. But now it was quite gone, a lost star. There were many other stars over the far-off poplars, but not one so bright and soft and shining as this particular favorite. Tears came into Icon's eyes. He was really grieved, really distressed, for somehow that dear star had seemed to his little heart to smile upon him out of heaven, and made him think of the mother whom he had never known. And this was the fancy which he could not tell to Dormer, for Dormer would not have understood in the least what he meant. Dormer, do the stars die? I want to know where the stars all go every day. They don't all die, because they are all right again next evening. I want to know where they go. I do want to know what the stars are, what they really are. I want to know why they twinkle so, and why some of them don't. And I can't think why they should be so bright. I wish I knew what made them shine. Could you feel how many ideas were being planted in just that small passage? As the story unfolds, Icon's father brings in a friend, a wise and kind professor who begins to answer Icon's questions about the stars. Yes, the book teaches all about the stars and the planets, but the book itself is a tutorial in teaching for you. Notice how the teacher carefully unfolds the layers and allows Icon time to digest and ponder. At one time, the professor tried to provide illustrations to answer a question Icon had, and Icon wondered which was the best illustration. The professor replied, "Whatever helps you to see most clearly the wonderful power of God. His power is shown in his works. In these old books you'll frequently find God woven into the stories in a quiet, gentle way." "Are the stars his works?" asked Icon. "He made the stars, child. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork." It's a beautiful interchange between a wise, loving older friend and a child. Now let's move on to month 2, the ocean. Maybe you don't live anywhere near the ocean. Search YouTube. You can find hours of ocean images and sounds of waves and seagulls that can be played on your TV as a background. Or look for flowers or birds or mountains, whatever you're studying that month. That's how you can bring nature indoors even when the snow is deep. How about playing the Moldau while your children are working on a craft where they can hear the little stream at the beginning that combines and grows bigger until it forms rapids and finally settles into the quiet sea? Month 2 is a good time for stories of explorers and adventurers who sailed the oceans of the world. Introduce your children to Jacques Cousteau and his undersea adventures. I love this little 1904 book of sea stories for Wonder Eyes that starts with this little chapter on a little girl who wondered. A little girl sat on a great rock by the sea looking out over the water. As far as her eye could reach, she saw only crested waves that came from far beyond, and every wave was wreathed with foam that flashed like a coronet of jewels. She had never heard what people say of the strange ebb and flow of the tides, but she knew that twice every day the waves crept up to the rock on which she sat, and that twice every day they receded, leaving a stretch of sandy beach. "I wonder who calls the waves back into the deep," she said softly to herself, and a strange awe came into her heart. "I wonder if a voice tells them that they may come back and play upon the sand." And as she spoke, the tide of awe that rose in her heart gave deep colors to her eyes, like the colors of the sea. "Oh, wonderful sea, do tell me some of your secrets," she exclaimed. For answer, a great wave with a crest of foam rose up from the green and purple currents and broke with a roaring sea laugh almost at her feet. When the surf was gone, she saw that the wave had left bits of seaweed on the sand, and shells, and queer, creeping, wriggling little sea things. "So this is the way you answer me," she exclaimed, "and I have to find out everything for myself." At first she saw only the shells and coarser wrack that lay exposed, but as her eye grew accustomed to the search, she found countless treasures that had been left on the sand, in coves and imprisoned in tide pools. The longer and the closer she looked, the more she was rewarded. The more she saw of the little sea things, the more she loved them, and the more she loved them, the more she was able to find. Slowly again the tide crept up the sand. "So, old sea, you are coming back after your treasures, are you?" said the child. "And I must go away. I love your roar, and your sea songs make me glad, but I wonder what you are singing about. I wonder where your bright waves come from. Oh, I wonder and wonder so many things." For this little girl who sat by the sea and who wondered, and for other girls and boys who wonder, these sea stories have been written. Month 3, Rocks. There's something about rocks that children love. I can never take my little grandchildren on walks without them filling their pockets with rocks. Let them bring them home and start learning their stories and building a rock collection. Collecting and sorting and identifying rocks and leaves and flowers all help children love nature more. My dad and one of my brothers love to go rock hunting together. Today my brother's yard is filled with rocks, and he can tell you the story of every one of them. Our dad's been gone for many years, but when he's out in the desert looking for rocks, he feels close to him. Grinding and polishing rocks has become a fun hobby that gives him much happiness and satisfaction. Have your children choose some rock crafts to do while you read to them, and help them begin to learn the stories of the rocks, such as are found in this 1899 book, Stories of Our Mother Earth by Harold Fairbanks. It begins. The earth is our home. As we climb the hills or follow the rippling streams or wander along the beach, we feel that this is a very pleasant place in which to live. We enjoy seeing the mountains and the plants and the trees, and by we begin to wonder about them and to ask questions. There's an idea being planted again. The world becomes to us something more than a mere playground made for our special benefit. We question the mountains and the rivers and the ocean. We wonder if they've always been where they are now. The mountains look so firm and solid, it seems as if they must always have stood where they do now. But some day we find shells upon a high ridge far from the ocean. This puzzles us, for these shells must have lived in the ocean once. We finally come to the conclusion that before we can know all about the plants, why one kind grows on the hillside, another by the brook, why the animals are distributed where we find them, why cities grow up where they do, and why in one part of the country people till the ground and in another dig deep for the minerals, we must know a little more about the foundations of our home. We must know how the rocks in the soil were made, how the mountains grew, and why the rivers run as they do. We must understand how nature is shaping the earth for us. In order to do this, we shall study what the rain and the frost are doing upon the mountain tops. We shall trace the river's course and find where the mud which it carries to the ocean comes from. We shall try to understand how this mud is spread over the floor of the ocean, and what the waves are doing as they continually beat against the land. We shall go beneath the rich soil upon which our grain grows, and find out what is going on within the earth. We shall want to know about many things which are dug from the earth. Nature has many forces at work, some great and some small. They have worked a long time getting this home of ours ready for us. If we can understand how nature works, our home will be more dear to us, and we shall be happier. Another idea is to listen to the Grand Canyon Suite with images from the Grand Canyon, then read Variety of the Grand Canyon together. If you're looking for a rock scientist, I love Louis Agassiz, who loved reading the story of our world in the rocks. As I read in one of the older books, it said that the story of the creation told in the Bible and the story told in the rocks are simply two versions of the same event. One account doesn't discount the other. Faith and reason, mind and heart work together in these old children's books. Agassiz was a teacher of great renown at Harvard who taught his students to learn by using their eyes. One biography I read of him said of him that he never knew a dull hour in his life, and he thought it an incredible joke that any person could kill time in a world so full of interest. In a letter to his brother, he wrote, "Write me about what you are reading and about your plans and projects, for I can hardly believe that anyone can live without forming them. I at least could not." His friends wanted to send him to Europe. He turned them down because he said there was too much he hadn't seen yet in his own backyard, and spent the next 9 months in joyful discovery. Agassiz is a good friend for a child to have. Longfellow wrote him a poem on his 50th birthday. It was 50 years ago in the pleasant month of May, in the beautiful Pays de Vaud, a child in its cradle lay, and Nature, the old nurse, took that child upon her knee, saying, "Here is a storybook thy father has written for thee. Come, wander with me," she said, "into regions yet untrod, and read what is still unread in the manuscripts of God." And he wandered away and away with Nature, his dear old nurse, who sang to him night and day the rhymes of the universe. And whenever the way seemed long or his heart began to fail, she would sing a more wonderful song or tell a more marvelous tale. If your children are little, here's the story of a little boy who grew up to be a great geologist. Hugh Miller. Here's how the story goes. Many, many years ago, there lived in a fishing town on the northeastern coast of Scotland a boy who afterwards became a very famous man. When he was only 5 years old, his father, who was a sailor, was lost at sea. His mother, though very poor, managed to send little Hugh to school, and there he learned a good deal from books. But if he had learned no more than to read and to write, he would probably have still been a great man, for in the meantime he had found something else worth more to him than many books. He had learned to read another language. He had found out that he had two eyes and how to use them. Notice the ideas being planted in your own children's hearts about learning. And then the book goes on to describe how Hugh read the clues in the rocks. Soon your children will read the clues in the rocks for themselves. Month 4. Plants and Trees. Is there anything more beautiful than a flower? What has man ever created that can even slightly compare with the color, the scent, and the texture of a flower? In Month 4, introduce your children to Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. Beethoven loved to take long walks out in nature, and he translated what he felt and saw into his music. And what better time to read The Secret Garden? Here's some flower crafting to do while they listen to you read from an 1898 book, Plants and Their Children by Mrs. William Starr Dana. And now a sample. Is there a nicer play in which to play than an old apple orchard? Once under these favorite trees whose branches sweep the ground, you are quite shut off from the great, troublesome outside world. And how happy and safe you feel in that green world of your own, a world just made for children, a world of grass and leaves and birds and flowers, where lessons and grown-up people alike have no part. That you children long to be out of the schoolroom this minute, out in the orchard so full of possibilities, I do not wonder a bit. But as the big people have decided that from now on, for some months, you must spend much of your time with lesson books, I have a plan to propose. What do you say to trying to bring something of the outdoor places that we love into the schoolroom, which we do not love as much as we should if lessons were always taught in the right way? She then goes on to describe the life of an apple blossom, leading up to a surprise for me. Have you ever cut an apple horizontally? Where did the apple blossom go? It's right there, imprinted right there in the middle of an apple. Go take a look. Nature is full of surprises like that. And I love this little interchange as she poses the question of what is the purpose of a plant's life. There is one especial thing which is really the object of the plant's life. A great many people seem to think that the object of all plants with pretty flowers must be to give pleasure. But these people quite forget that hundreds and thousands of flowers live and die far away in lonely forests, where no human eye ever sees them, that they so lived and died hundreds and thousands of years before there were any men and women and boys and girls upon the earth. And so, if they stopped long enough quietly to think about it, they would see for themselves that plants must have some other object in life than to give people pleasure. But let us go back to the tree from which we took this apple and see if we can find out its special object. Why apples, some of you exclaim. Sure, the object of an apple tree is to bear apples. That is it, exactly. An apple tree lives to bear apples. And now, why is an apple such an important thing? Why is it worth so much time and trouble? What is its use? It's good to eat, chime all the children in chorus. Yes, so it is, but then you must remember that once upon a time, apple trees, like all other plants and trees, grew in lonely places where there were no boys and girls to eat their fruit. So we must find some other answer. Think for a moment, and then tell me what you find inside every apple. Apple seeds, one of you replies. And what is the use of those apple seeds? Why, they make new apple trees. If this be so, if every apple holds some little seeds from which new apple trees may grow, does it not look as though an apple were useful and important because it yields seeds? And what is true of the apple tree is true of other plants and trees. The plant lives to bear fruit. The fruit is that part of the plant which holds its seeds, and it is of importance for just this reason, that it holds the seeds from which come new plants. And now I'll just leave that story there and let you ponder the layers of its meaning. Learning about flowers and trees is a perfect month to introduce nature journaling. I really love John Muir Laws. He has lots of free videos online that teach you how to draw from nature, but he came out with a book recently that is just the best, and it's called The Laws Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling. While I read a little from John's introduction, I'm going to show you some images from a nature journal created in 1906 by Edith Wharton, The Country Diary of an Edwardian Lady, just to give you something to aspire to. John assures us anyone can learn to draw. Here's from the intro. When we see with clear eyes, we know that we are surrounded with beauty. Let yourself fall in love with your life by paying attention. As David Steindl-Rast said, it is not happiness that makes us grateful, it's gratefulness that makes us happy. As you record what you see in your journal, give thanks for what surrounds you. When you celebrate the world through the pages of your journal, every stroke of your brush or pencil can be a song of gratitude for the opportunity to be alive. Think how often you have said to yourself, I will never forget this moment. Sometimes the moment sticks, but although it can be hard to admit, we forget many experiences and ideas that were once meaningful to us. It is possible to skip through this life with only dim memories of even our most major life events. In every instant, we consciously process only a fraction of the data we get from our senses, and we remember only a tiny piece of that. But the process of journaling is enough to burn a moment into your memory. Every day you can fill your mind with wonder and fill your journal with a record of the beauty you have experienced. Love can be defined as sustained, compassionate attention. Paying sincere attention to another person helps us build understanding and kindness. Similarly, I feel understanding, care, and compassion when I journal and turn deep attention to nature. Journaling is a skill for anyone who wishes to live life more deeply, a skill that you can learn at any age and that will develop with intention and practice. Observing and journaling will slow you down and make you stop, sit down, look, and look again. Engaging in this process helps you to organize your thoughts, piece together answers, and ask richer questions. Once you slow down and look long enough to record observations in your journal, mysteries will unfold before you. At the core of science are insatiable curiosity and deep observations, qualities that lead to the best kind of learning, learning motivated by your intrinsic wonder, hunger to understand, and ability to observe. I draw to see, to remember, and to stimulate curiosity, to move through the world with joy. Doesn't that make you want to grab a sketch pad and some paint and start drawing? And by the way, there's no better way to inspire your children to start nature journaling than to watch you do it. Since month 4 falls in December and Christmas time, which is busy for most families, I continued the study into month 5 and added gardening as part of it. Now you may say that should definitely be taught in spring, but not so. January is exactly the right month to start dreaming and planning of what's going to be in that garden and going through seed catalogs and ordering seeds, many of which can be started indoors. I can think of no more important activity in a child's life than growing a flower garden of his very own. And I love 2 little books by Frances Duncan written in the early 1900s that makes the process simple and at a child's level. When Mother Lets Us Garden and Mary's Garden and How It Grew. It opens with, the very nicest kind of mothers and fathers will always let you make a garden. If there isn't a small piece of ground that you can have, then take a box. If you can't have a box of earth, then take a flower pot or even a tin can. What better way to teach children the lessons of patience and waiting, of sowing and harvesting, and like Corrie ten Boom taught in The Hiding Place, people can learn to love from flowers. Month 5 is when we're going to take a look at insects and bugs. What child doesn't love Rimsky-Korsakov's Flight of the Bumblebee? And month 5 could be a good month to read Charlotte's Web or A Cricket in Times Square. Let them craft bugs while you read. Cecil's Book of Insects by Selim H. Peabody, written in 1868, is a good book to start with. Here's a preview. Do you ever find yourself some dreamy summer day with nothing to do? The hot, dense rays of the July sun scorch the dry grass, glow in the burning sand, and almost hiss in the water of the idle stream. The birds hide in the dense thickets, the cattle pant in the shade, and the very dog wishes he could take his jacket off. The boy has exhausted all his plans for fun, and in despair asks his mother, "What shall I do?" "I'll tell you what to do. Find an ant hill in some shady place where the sun will not burn your back. Lie down upon your face and watch it. You have passed such 1,000 times without knowing what curious things could be seen there. The little fellows worked all the morning and brought up out of that hole in the middle all the grains of sand that you see piled around in a tiny circular fortress. One by one they brought them out and laid them in their places. Now they are thoroughly warmed by the sun, and they are carrying them back again into the rooms which they have excavated below. If there's a flat stone near, turn it over, and you will quite likely find a much busier crowd. A large chamber with many winding passages running hither and thither, and connecting with each other and with other passages underneath, has been made, like the public square in the thronged streets of an old-fashioned city. Scattered all along the thoroughfares of this stone-canopied town are many long, round, white somethings, a little like grains of wheat. People have mistaken these things for food of the ants, and so have written, "The little ant for one poor grain doth tug and toil and strive." But the ants lay up no food. They need none, for as soon as the hard frosts of autumn chill them, they lie down to sleep till the spring wakes them again. If they did lay up food, it would not be grain, for the ant can no more eat grain than a man can eat gold, and the ant is not so big a fool as to hoard what he cannot use. Others have thought that these little white sacks are the eggs of the ants, but eggs do not grow, and surely ants cannot lay eggs that are larger than themselves. Whatever they are, the ants evidently think them very valuable. These sacs contain the young ants. The eggs were laid by the queen and hatched by the warmth of the hot grains of sand. The grubs were fed and grew, and finally shut themselves up in sacs as the caterpillar spins a cocoon. Then the ant takes great care of these sacs. They are very precious to them because they contain their children. Insects are the smallest of creatures, but when you consider the complex and intricate makeup of their tiny little bodies and the instinct to organize and colonize and build and care for their young, it's astonishing. And here's a good parenting lesson from the world of insects and tiny creatures. A twig where clung 2 soft cocoons I broke from a wayside spray and carried home to a quiet desk where, long forgot, it lay. One morn I chanced to lift the lid, and lo, as light as air, a moth flew up on downy wings and settled above my chair. A dainty, beautiful thing it was, orange and silvery gray, and I marveled how from the withered boughs such fairies stole away. Had the other flown? I turned to see, and found it striving still to free itself from the swathing floss and rove the air at will. "Poor little prisoned waif," I said, "you shall not struggle more," and I tenderly cut the threads and watched to see it soar. Alas, a feeble chrysalis it dropped from its silken bed. My help had been the direst harm. The pretty moth was dead. I should have left it there to gain the strength that struggle brings. 'Tis the stress and strain, with moth or man, that free the folded wings. Moving on to month 7, we're ready to take a look at birds. Are there any other creatures that seem to know the meaning of joy like they do? Have you ever just sat and watched them? And what would the world be without their songs? Listen to Stravinsky's Firebird Finale or Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Introduce them to Audubon and his beautiful drawing of birds. Read a children's classic like Trumpet of the Swan. Find a branch from a tree and set it in a pot in your house and see how many birds you can identify and sketch and hang on your little tree. You may need some binoculars. And can you recognize them from their song? Make some bird feeders, and while their hands are busy, tell your children stories like this from Olive Thorne Miller's True Bird Stories, written in 1903. I want to tell you about a wild bluebird who knew enough to appreciate the comforts of home. The bird was found in a store in a very bad condition, having been caught in a trap and beaten herself against the wires till her wing feathers were broken so that she could not fly. She was put into the cage of another bluebird who had been so injured that he could never fly. The stranger showed herself to be rather ill-mannered. She grabbed the best of everything and drove the owner of the cage about as if it were hers and not his. In fact, she was so greedy that the mistress thought he would be very glad when she had gone. So as soon as she had molted and had come out with new plumage and perfect wing feathers, the cage door was open and away flew Madame Blue and disappeared. Then the bird who was left began to call her. All day he called, but there was no sign that the runaway heard. The next day, 24 hours after she had been set free, one of the family found her back, and trying with all her might to squeeze into the cage between the wires, while her old cage mate was greatly excited, calling in the sweetest voice, welcoming her and encouraging her to come in. The cage door was open for her, and she flew right in, plainly delighted to get home. Then came the most lively chatting between the two. One could not help feeling that she was telling how uncomfortable she found it having to hunt up food and water, and how much nicer it was to have a whole family of people to wait on and care for one. She ate and drank and appeared as if she could not get enough, and was evidently perfectly happy. Open doors were no temptation to her any more. I'll leave you to ponder on that story too. And now month 8, animals. Are there any stories that are more delightful to children or of which there is an endless supply? Black Beauty, Lassie Come Home, all the Marguerite Henry books, Bambi, not like the Disney movie at all. The list is long, and so are the lessons as children learn how carefully animal mamas care for their babies, how they build their homes, how they teach their children to be independent. Introduce them to James Herriot's writings, a vet who loved animals. There's a little book I found written in 1911 by Harry Brearley called Animal Secrets Told, a Book of Wise. Here's an excerpt from the intro. Animal Secrets Told is intended much less as a means for conveying information than for suggesting and, if possible, stimulating the use by the reader of those original powers of observation and deduction by which he may gain knowledge at first hand. These powers are natural and active in the mind of the child. He is surrounded by a world of crowded wonders which must at first produce the sense of confusion, but the innate orderliness of his mental action soon manifests itself in his commencing to ask, why? In other words, he perceives this is a world of reason, that there is a law behind these phenomena, and it becomes at once a keen intellectual pleasure to find these reasons, and then by applying straightforward childish logic to uncover the law. No parent need to be told how active is this phase of childhood, nor how the rapid fire of whys from little lips is accompanied by the rapid expansion of the little mind. But the grown person is apt to become mentally lazy, and to wish to receive his knowledge in pre-digested form, whereby it happens that the fascinating glamour of those early golden days passes swiftly away. One's arm will shrivel if he never uses it. One's teeth will decay if he neglect to chew. One's eye was intended for seeing, not for looking. but steadily neglected for years, in its higher function, it becomes at last a mere dull looker upon a leaden-colored world, where the truer vision child finds light, color, and enchantment. As a matter of fact, the world is as fascinating a place as ever. It has not changed its capacity during the few years since childhood. The dreary, unimportant phenomena, which seems to fall into a heavy-footed procession of endless repetition, are in reality dancing forth alive with interest and almost bursting with significance as the seeing eye would at once perceive. Animal Secrets Told asks the question, why? Why are the eyes placed on a fish one way and on a bear another? And other similar questions. My grown son formatted this book for me and was so curious he could hardly wait to go to the National Zoo to see for himself. As was written, grown people as well have come easily under the spell of doing what so many adults have hardly grasped as possible to them, learning things for themselves instead of waiting to be told. Isn't that so true? Now notice something else. After you've been through the rotation a few times, it's time to start layering in the science layer. In essence, your children have felt the magic, and now you're going to take them backstage and start helping them to see how the magic is done. This is a time for simple experiments that demonstrate laws and principles. Notice how the first 3 months lend themselves to beginning study of earth sciences, light and physics, chemistry and geology. The last months lend themselves to life sciences, biology, botany, zoology. As you continue to layer in understanding, by the time your children reach high school, they will have rich and fertile soil in which to begin a systematic academic study of science, all of which will continue to reveal the workmanship of a creator who pays attention to the minutest detail and who loves us and who is a God of order, beauty, and purpose. We are his crowning creation. And you will have laid the foundation for a lifetime of interest, with endless discoveries to be made and lessons too deep for the heart to be revealed in any other way. As Anna McGovern wrote, the value of nature study should not be measured by the acquisition of knowledge, but rather by the love and the profound reverence for the design and the protecting care revealed in the works and sky by an all-wise creator. Now, it's time to wind up. I hope that I've helped you feel the difference between a heart education and a mind education. Heart and mind need to work in concert, but heart first, and then mind if you want to do your part in turning the tide of hard-heartedness. If you'd like me to send you a page with all the direct links to the books I've referenced in this presentation, just send me an email at librariesofhope@gmail.com and write nature in the subject line. All the books I've shared with you today can be read on your iPad for free. Almost all of the books that I've referenced are in the books that we've reprinted in our nature series at Libraries of Hope, if you're interested in having hard copies. They're available in the store at welleducatedheart.com. If you have high schoolers that miss this heart phase, I always start my study of anything by finding a children's book. Let your high schoolers know that these children's books really are not beneath them and may open a whole world they didn't know existed, even though it was right there all the time. One of the commonalities among many of the great lives I've studied is the time they took to walk in nature. There's an ordering property that happens when you take walks in nature. Part of it may lie in the rhythm of walking, but I think more importantly, there are instant messages made on our hearts that clarify our thoughts, clear our brains, and renew our spirits. We associate recreation with the great outdoors. Well, it is truly a place of recreation, as is expressed in this little poem with which I will close this presentation. The little cares that fretted me, I lost them yesterday among the fields above the sea, among the winds at play, among the lowing of the herds, the rustling of the trees, among the singing of the birds, the humming of the bees. The foolish fears of what may happen I cast them all away among the clover-scented grass, among the new-mown hay, among the rustling of the corn, where drowsy poppies nod, where ill thoughts die and good are born, out in the fields with God.